Hello, React Rally. What a room. This is fantastic. Oh, man. I have been working in React for darn near 10 years, basically since it was open sourced. I've spoken at tons of conferences. I've never spoken at a React event. Like every conversation I get into, people know React. It's really refreshing. Like we can all talk chops. I'm really having fun. We're going to talk about reusable components. And when we talk about it, recognize that my views on this are informed by working with dozens of companies for years. And I've seen things work and I've seen things fail. So there's some scar tissue in here that informs all of this. And when I say this, you can rewind a bit. Back to 1989 when Kevin Costner was out in a cornfield and he was hearing voices saying, if you build it, they will come. Very strange movie where he builds a baseball field and then ghosts of old baseball legends come and play in his cornfield. Don't know who came up with this thing. I bring this up because I think as developers, sometimes we think we're Kevin Costner. We think if we build reusable components, they will come. They'll come use them. Everybody will use them, right? Because all I have to do is create them. But that's just not how life actually works. As a React developer, things are fairly straightforward. If I find myself copying and pasting code, that's a sign that I might want to create a component. If I'm copying and pasting JSX. And if I'm copying and pasting logic, well, that's a sign that I might want to create a hook. I love how simple this is. Those two things. And in code reviews and daily, this is something that's regularly running through my head. Now, what's interesting is creating components is easy because of that model that we talked about, but creating reusable components is hard, and it's hard for a lot of different reasons. Now, when I say hard, it's hard because if I asked you right now in this room, go create a component library for me, you might not realize how many things I'm asking you to decide. It is a bananas number of decisions. And as a software developer today, that's what makes things hard, is how many ways there are to do things. This is a list of 50 different potential decisions that you have to make if you're going to create reusable components, and this presumes that you're using React for that matter. There's an even longer list if you go farther. So these are just a few decisions. That's 50 things. 50 things that you have to think about. And that's hard, and that might involve getting in a room and having difficult decisions about exactly how this could play out. And sometimes these can get very entertaining. There's lots of ways that this can get sideways. It's kind of like a tabs versus spaces argument in many cases, because you're going to have to make judgment calls. And I've seen so many reasons that components fail. I tweeted this out the other day. This was just off the top of my head. Reasons that I could think of that some team had created a component library and it wasn't working out because people said these sorts of things. And this is not a complete list of things that can go wrong. So in this talk, what we want to try to do is talk about some of the keys to avoiding those problems. So let's talk about key number one. We're going to talk about 7 keys. We got a few minutes here. We're going to start with this. Who is your audience? And by audience, I mean, who is going to use these components? That seems pretty fundamental, but there's lots of ways to think about this. And you might wonder, oh, where the heck did Dan Abramov come from? Well, I love Dan, and I wish he was here. He's not here, right? If he is, and I'll do the fanboy. Hi, Dan. So one thing to keep in mind. So Dan's got 233,000 followers on Twitter. Wait. No, that's not right. My slide's wrong because that's Kinsey Dodds, has 233,000. Dan has 380,000. I got a formatting issue here. Oh, guys, this transition was supposed to be much cooler. Anyway, Dan, Kinsey Dodds, they got a ton of followers, but y'all have to remember, at some point they had no followers. Nobody knew who they were. And that's the same thing that happens with our components, that at first we are not going to have any audience at all. We're going to have to build an audience for these components. 4 levels: project, team, business, public. Start out on a project. Start out by trying to create reusable components just for a project. And the reason that's important is start small, start simple, start where you can actually be successful, prove it out on that level. Don't try jumping into saying, we're building a reusable component library for our entire business. And you go, well, how many people have used that tab component? Well, nobody yet, but we're going to build the perfect tab component on the first try for everybody. That's unlikely. That's hard to do. It's a lot easier if you say, we've used it on this project, it's proven on this project, let's try it on a second one. All right, now people seem to have gotten the bugs out. Now maybe we can talk about entire teams or entire business units or maybe the whole company. So our audience ramps up over time. That's key number one. Key number two, you need a design system. Who knows what a design system is? Because that's not necessarily a given here. We're a bunch of developers. See, not that many hands in here. So let's talk about what a design system is. First, why do you need it? Without a design system, you are nailing Jell-O to the wall. You aren't actually clear what your target is. Your target's constantly moving because a design system says, this is the rule. This is what we're trying to follow. And without a design system, we don't know these things. So a design system is typography, white space, colors, icons, values, images, the voice and tone that we use. Notice that these are not decisions that developers should be making. Who makes these decisions? Designers. Designers decide these things, and then they tell developers how to implement it. I work with so many companies that are struggling because they don't actually have a design system, and they sometimes don't even have design teams. So developers are just told, go build reusable components and try to use your best judgment on exactly what they should do. What? And then you know what happens is the next project, someone else doesn't have a designer either, and they're supposed to try to use these components, maybe, but they don't have really much political will to do so. You can see how that goes sideways. It's easy to see. Now, you might think, oh, well, we have designs in Figma, so Figma is our design system. No. Figma is not a design system, people. Figma tells me what I'm supposed to build for a project. Now, you could keep all the information about your design system largely in Figma, and in fact, that's really useful to have the primitives that represent your React components in Figma so that they are dragging and dropping tab controls and buttons and tables. But Figma is not a design system. If you want to build a design system, go look at Spectrum. Adobe Spectrum is, I think, a wonderful example of a design system done well. And look over here on the left-hand side, this navigation. Look what's in there. Design tokens, theming, color, typography, motion, states, iconography, illustrations, international design, bidirectionality, all these little pieces of how things are designed. And the design system is so important because it's foundational. Without a design system, what you'll run into is the goalposts are always moving because design is always moving. Designers are hired and fired, and different designers work on different projects, and I see this all the time. Well, we created these components over here. Yeah, but we just hired Jenny and Bob, and Jenny and Bob have a different vision. Oh, great. So now we get to reinvent everything again. The goalposts keep moving. And moving goalposts is not really motivating. It's an ongoing problem. Nothing motivates employees like setting a goal, reaching it, and then being told it's not good enough. So if you want to actually build a design system, Zero Height is a wonderful way to do that. Check out their site. One thing that I really like about Zero Height is it basically has all these slots to fill in. You go, all right, tell us about your typography. Tell us about your color themes. Tell us about your internationalization, your voice and tone. So it is basically like a CMS that is custom tailored to building a design system. So it's not like you actually need Zero Height, but I bring it up because I've seen that those guardrails can help companies set them up quickly. Step number 3, start rigid. And when I say rigid, I really mean opinionated. And by opinionated, I mean you shouldn't have 42 props at the beginning. So when I say rigid too, there's lots of ways to think about flexibility. Style, I might want to change colors and padding and sizes and fonts. I may want to change layouts between horizontal and vertical, media queries, how the data displays, maybe even logic. So all of this is flexibility. And as developers, we're addicted to thinking about flexibility. Like, flexibility sounds way sexier than rigidity. No. I want this code to work for lots of different things instead of in one little area. And that causes us to over-index on flexibility. Instead, think about it like this. What I'm trying to represent here is a spectrum, and over on the left is rigid and on the right is flexible. Well, rigid has a lot of benefits. It's simpler to create and implement. And before I go farther, when I say rigid, imagine a component that has no props, or maybe just one prop. It does one thing really well, and it has very little configurability. That makes it simple to implement, easy to understand, easy to test, less work to maintain. It has more opinion, which means more consistency and less fatigue when you work with it. So one other thing, it's easy to add flexibility, but it's hard to remove. So those are all great reasons to start out rigid. Make your component just do that one thing well. And then at some point, yeah, sure, we'll make it reusable. We'll make it flexible in more contexts over time. The reason this is important is this idea of the tragedy of the commons. And we see this all the time in public spaces, that as individuals, unfortunately, we behave contrary to the common good. And this happens if somebody goes out to a park and they misuse the equipment, they break that equipment, or perhaps take their cows and let their cows graze in a public park, and then they've destroyed all the grass. And maybe that was good for the cows and good for the farmer, but it wasn't good for all the other people that want to enjoy the park. That's the tragedy of the commons. All sorts of examples in public society of this. And the tragedy of the commons in React components looks something like this. Hey, can't we just make it configurable? Just slap another prop on there. I need a prop that says is Tuesday, and that'll solve the problem. Yeah, but an is Tuesday prop smells a bit. How about we handle this via a separate component? I think your case probably isn't a fit, because props are easy to add, sure, but they're hard to remove, just like any feature. And I think about this very much as a game of tug of war, where on one side we have consistency, on the other side we have flexibility. On one side we have features, and on the other side we have simplicity. These pull at each end of a rope, and recognize that we all want both simplicity and features, but anytime you add one, you're losing the other. So you've got to balance. The more consistency that we enforce, though, the less decision fatigue that developers have. If a component has 50 props, I feel a sense of decision fatigue that I don't feel if the component has 2 props. Because I'm going, oh man, look at all this. Not sure if I'm configuring it right, because there's so many ways to set this thing up. Props are easy to add, hard to remove, so start rigid, add props when necessary. All right, key number 4. Choose your foundations very carefully. Isaac Newton said, I have seen further by standing on the shoulders of giants. And that's our opportunity as developers today, more than ever. You look at NPM, we've got over 1 million packages. It's unbelievable. Largest package manager in the world. And you are totally missing out if you think the best way to build your component library is starting from 0. That's almost certainly not the right idea, at least for a lot of your components, because we have Material UI, we have Radix, we have Chakra UI, we have Ant Design, we have Aria Kit. I could go on and on and on. These are just a few that I throw in here. But we are at a place right now where we can and almost certainly should stand on the shoulders of giants. We shouldn't be starting from 0. They're already so far down the line. We should be starting with these and then manipulating them a bit to our needs. Because now the other thing related to this is you are not making a one-step decision. It's not like you're coming over here and saying, okay, I'm going to have to pick Ant Design or Aria Kit, and all of our components are going to have to be based on those. No. You're thinking like you're constructing one building with one foundation. That's not what React components or a component library is. What it's actually analogous to is this. Every one of those skyscrapers has its own foundation. Think of the skyscraper on the left as your tab control, the skyscraper in the middle as your button. That's a very complex button. The metaphor's maybe stretching here. You get the idea. And a common starting point here, I see this a lot at companies, is well, we're just really getting started in React. We don't have a component library, but in our README, we're just going to say, hey, for a component library, we use MUI. That is absolutely fine. Nothing wrong with that. Just go ahead and use MUI for a while, and what you're going to find is, oh, well, people keep putting the same props on button every time, and people keep putting these inline styles here every time to meet this particular requirement. That's a sign we should probably start creating some reusable components here. Let things grow organically. We don't have to do this up front. It's absolutely okay to copy and paste code for a while. But at some point, you're going to want to actually create reusable components. And if you're going to do that, you got 4 options. Build your own, wrap a third party, fork it, or generate it. So let me show these just briefly. If I'm going to wrap a component, this is what it might look like. I just call some other component. Maybe I want to wrap Material UI. Now, Material UI is also interesting because you may not need to at all, since Material UI has this idea of theming, and it's not merely stylistic. It's also theming can end up setting default arguments and props on components, so you don't have to do that redundantly, and you don't have to wrap them like this. But wrapping gives you a lot of compositional power, and as you can see, conceptually, it's dirt simple. Or you could go ahead and fork it. Maybe wrapping doesn't give you enough power. You actually need to fully control the code. Click fork, nothing wrong with that. Go ahead and fork the repo. Finally, this is becoming a very popular option. You could generate your components, and the most popular example of this that I've seen is shadcn UI. And what this does is it generates a component using a command line, and it generates a component that happens to use radix behind the scenes. It also contains Tailwind styles. It also has your TypeScript type set up, sets up forward references and display name, all the sorts of things that are easy to miss. This works wonderfully and gives you a nice proven foundation. But what's cool about this is you own the code because it generates it, and now you can do whatever you want with it. They also have this nice little diffing tool that you can use to bring things back together later. Okay, key number 5. This one is really important. I have made this mistake and I still see it often. Honor HTML. And by that I mean this. If you're going to go create a reusable button, do not put a text property that says submit. Instead, make the content of the button a child, because that's what HTML does. And to drive this point home, pretend that this lectern is HTML. Oh, I honor you, HTML. I know that was a really silly thing for me to do, but I'm trying to get you to remember this particular point because I think it's about the most important point that I have. The moment that you're headed down the road of creating a reusable component that has an API different than the underlying HTML element, like the button, like the table, you are probably headed down a road of pain, because HTML is absolutely proven, been around for decades, covers all the edge cases, and like you look at the button text submit, you might say, well, how's that going to hold me back? Well, what if you want to put an icon in the button? Now you can't. What if you want to have some of the text in there bold or italicized? Now you can't. So you start finding edges pretty quickly. This is another example of it. I've see lists and I go, well, it could accept an array of items, but in HTML, what we would do is actually compose child components here. So I could use a compound component to convey this and to have an API that gives me more flexibility, feels more natural to the developer, feels more like a regular unordered list or ordered list. Okay, getting down to the wire here. Key number 6 is use the rule of 3. Jeff Atwood, creator of Stack Overflow, or co-founder, reusable components should be tried out in 3 different applications before it will be sufficiently general to accept into a reuse library. This is a rule that Atwood talked about years ago, and I think there's a lot of wisdom here. I've certainly made this mistake thinking that I had it right, put it into reuse. Now, you realize later, oh, this isn't working out so well. Now, Jeff actually lived this very rule with Stack Overflow. When Stack Overflow was created, it was just one site, Stack Overflow, and then they realized, oh man, lots of people find this useful, maybe we should create other instances of it. So they created Server Fault, and then they created Super User. Now what's interesting is when they created Server Fault and Super User, they copy and pasted the code from Stack Overflow and put it over here and then tweaked some stuff, and now they've got Super User, and now they've got Server Fault. And that, as a developer, you go, ooh, Now you've doubled the size of your code base, but they deliberately did that because he said, we couldn't see what the seams were, what needed to be reusable until we'd actually proven it out in a few instances. Then later we resolved and we pulled out the reusable pieces. There's a lot of wisdom there. Other people do that, like it's a helpful pattern. So after they did that, after they proved it, then they created the Stack Exchange communities, where today they have hundreds probably of Stack Exchange communities. Huge number, which is good because I feel like Stack Overflow's stock is headed down. AI is beating them up. See where they go from here. So that summarizes what I was just talking about. Now they have over 100 different sites after finding what the reuse seams really were. So the rule of 3 says, try using a component in at least 3 spots before you try declaring it as a reusable component and putting it into your reusable library. Okay, key number 7. It is a product. Think about your reusable components as a product. And I worked at Cox Automotive for quite a few years. You've probably heard of Auto Trader, Kelley Blue Book, Vin Solutions, lots of companies under there that are automotive related. And I created a component library and ultimately grew a team as part of that, had a team of like 7 developers there. We treated that like a product. We had a brand name for the components. We had a logo for that. We had nice shiny docs that made it really easy to use. We promoted that across the company. We made sure that executives knew about it so that they could. I recently had a conversation, I left years ago, but I had a conversation, they're still using that component library. It is used by over 100 different React applications across the company now. And it caught fire because we treated it like a product, because we recognized it had to be promoted, it had to be branded, it needed more than just a repository. And the credit goes to lots of other people that helped make that happen. Because I was, focused a lot on the code, but I also saw like marketing matters. And when we look at pictures like this is an interesting picture because it's juxtaposition. It puts 2 things together that really don't feel like they align. We've got the beauty of the new and the decay of the old next to each other. And that catches your attention. But as a consultant, I look at people's code bases all the time. People come to me and say, we're struggling in React. Can you look at what we're doing? Can you audit what is going on? Why are we struggling? How could we handle state better and these things? And often what they show me is a component folder that feels like this. Like here's a drawer full of components, and I'm going, but why is everything here? And I'll say, do you all have reusable components? And they'll say, yeah. And I say, okay, where are they? And they'll say, in that drawer. I'm like, which ones? Well, like that one's reusable. And I say, what about that one? No, not that one. But how can you tell? Well, we just kind of know. And that's the problem of having a folder just called components with everything in it. It's not organized. So I recommend have a shared folder. It doesn't really matter what you call it. Call it shared, call it reusable, whatever. But have a place where people can easily find the reusable stuff. So for example, I often see folder structures that look like this, where we just have a components folder with a bunch of stuff in it. Well, I recommend co-locating code that changes together. So keep all the code related to a given page together. But then also some things aren't related to a single page or a single domain. Well, put those in a shared folder. And now that shared folder screams to everybody, this is reusable stuff. I also recommend you don't have to have a single shared folder. You can also have shared folders within a domain. So here, for example, maybe under the product page, I have some shared components that are used by the product detail page, the product list page, and other product-related code. So you can have nested shared folders, but remember that shared folder really screams to everybody, hey, look, this is where we check for reusable code. Now, just a folder isn't enough. You also need to make those components easy to see, easy to interact with, and tools like Storybook are really useful for that. Imagine most of you have heard of Storybook, but remember, Storybook isn't the only option out here. There's some other good ones to consider. Ladle is great. Ladle is Vite-based, so it's really fast. Another one you might like is Docs with a Z. There's also React Style Guidist, or maybe you just want to build your own. And one way that you can do this, I just tweeted this out a couple days ago. This just occurred to me, and I'm still toying with the idea, but I think this has legs. Fork your render. Render both your docs for your components and your app using the same darn code. Like, the problem with Storybook, for instance, is it has a completely separate build process, and that means that now you've got to manipulate Storybook setup and this other code. So fork your render, you can render it all in one spot. And when you do that, I also recommend don't build your docs by hand. Instead, generate them. A great way to do that is via React DocGen. This is what React DocGen does. You point it at your code, and it generates a bunch of metadata about your components so you can write custom docs. That's how Material UI, for instance, builds their docs. When they change their code, their docs just magically change. Super cool. I did this for a few different clients, and we love it. It's a whole lot of fun. Generate your docs, it keeps everything in sync, your code becomes more readable, you get better autocomplete, it enforces that consistency, so it's pretty sweet setup there. And to summarize here, reusable components are a product. That means branding matters, publicity matters, and support matters. All those things are key. Remember, notice that all of these have a custom logo, have a snappy brand, have nice looking clean sites. They're really treating themselves as a product, and that's what our component libraries need to do too within corporations. All right, I breezed through this. I had to move quickly because this is actually a little piece of a 6-hour, 20-minute course that I published on Pluralsight. Now given, this course has been around a while, since 2017, but it remains relevant because frankly, advice about reusable components, it's really pretty timeless information, so check out Pluralsight. I have a bunch of courses out there on React and JavaScript. Also, this slide summarizes the points that I just made. Start small, use a design system. Start rigid, add props when needed. Use third parties, stand on the shoulder of giants. Think just like Isaac Newton. Wrap, fork, or generate when it's time for you to create those components. Honor HTML. Remember what I said with the weird lectern metaphor there. Use the rule of 3. Don't add right away. And remember to treat your reusable components like a product. Brand them, promote them, and so on. If these slides were helpful to you, take a quick shot up here, or you can go to bit.ly/3QHS. You can also follow me on Twitter. I am HouseCor. I will tweet out a link to these. It's HOUSECOR. So if you don't get a chance to take this picture, check on Twitter here in a second. HOUSECOR. I also have a few links down there to other things. I feed my kids by doing React consulting. I'm a full-time consultant, independent. This is what I do. You can find out more about me and what I do at reactjsconsulting.com. I am loving React Rally. Excited to hang out with y'all. Was this helpful? Yeah. Wonderful. Have a great day, y'all. Thank you.